Have you ever faced a challenge so huge, so impossible, that it felt like staring at an inclimbable wall? What if I told you there's a story, a true story about an entire city, protected by massive, impenetrable walls, that fell without a single sword being drawn in battle? This isn't a fantasy tale. It's one of the most incredible events recorded in history, a story of faith, obedience, and a victory that defies all logic. Get ready, because we're about to uncover the stunning account of Joshua, the Israelites, and the day the walls of Jericho came crashing down. You'll want to stick around to the very end to understand how this ancient strategy for overcoming the impossible can still be applied to the walls in your own life today. After 40 long years of wandering in the desert, the people of Israel stood at the edge of their promised land. Moses, their great leader, had passed away, and the mantle of leadership now rested on the shoulders of a man named Joshua. The book of Joshua, chapter 1, tells us God himself commissioned him, saying, "Be strong and very courageous. Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." This was more than just an encouragement. It was a promise that would soon be tested in the most dramatic way possible. Their very first obstacle was the city of Jericho. This wasn't just any city. Archaeologists confirm Jericho was one of the oldest and most fortified cities in the world. It had double walls, an outer wall and an inner wall, so thick that houses were built on top of them. From a military perspective, it was a fortress, a symbol of unbeatable strength. For the Israelites, who were essentially a nomadic people with no siege engines or sophisticated weaponry, the task of conquering Jericho seemed utterly impossible. How could a wandering tribe take down a military stronghold? This is where the story takes a turn that no military strategist could ever predict. Before any attack plan was made, Joshua did something crucial. He sent two spies into the city to gather intelligence. As we read in Joshua chapter 2, these spies found refuge in the house of a woman named Rahab. Rahab's house was literally built into the city wall. She was a Canaanite, an outsider, but she had heard of the God of Israel. She told the spies, "I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us." She recognized a power greater than Jericho's walls. In an incredible act of faith, she hid the spies and helped them escape, making them promise to spare her and her family when the city was taken. This one woman's faith, in the heart of the enemy city, became a key part of God's unfolding plan. When the spies returned to Joshua, they reported that the people of Jericho were paralyzed with fear. The momentum was on Israel's side, but not because of their own strength. It was because the reputation of their God had preceded them. Now, with the people poised to enter the land, God gave Joshua the battle plan. And it was, to put it mildly, bizarre. There would be no battering rams, no catapults, no scaling ladders. The instructions, found in Joshua chapter 6, were completely unconventional. God told Joshua, "You shall march around the city, all the men of war going around the city once. Thus you shall do for 6 days. 7 priests were to carry 7 trumpets made of ram's horns and walk ahead of the Ark of the Covenant, which represented God's very presence among his people. The armed men would walk before the priests, and the rest of the people would follow behind the Ark. And here's the most peculiar part. For 6 straight days, as they marched around this mighty fortress, they were commanded to be completely silent. No battle cries, no taunts, no war songs. Just the sound of marching feet and the steady rhythm of their procession. Can you imagine what that was like? Picture the scene. Inside the city walls, the soldiers of Jericho are on high alert. They see this massive army approaching, and they brace for an attack. But instead of charging, the Israelites just walk. They circle the entire city once, in total, unnerving silence, and then they just leave. They go back to their camp. The next day, the same thing happens. And the next. For 6 days, this silent, mysterious ritual unfolds. The tension must have been unbearable. The psychological pressure on the inhabitants of Jericho would have been immense. They were watching a silent countdown, a spiritual siege that made no logical sense. For the Israelites, it was a profound test of obedience and patience. They weren't fighting, they were following. They were trusting that God's plan, as strange as it seemed, was the path to victory. Their silence was an act of faith, a declaration that their trust wasn't in their own noise or strength, but in God's power. Then came the seventh day. The instructions changed. On this day, God told them to march around the city not once, but 7 times. After 6 days of silence and a total of 6 laps around the city, this 7th day would require an incredible amount of stamina and focus. Imagine the anticipation building with each lap. 1, 2, 3 times around. The sun is rising higher, the air is thick with expectation. 4, 5, 6 times. The people of Jericho are watching from the walls, confused, maybe even mocking, but definitely on edge. The Israelites are marching, their hearts pounding, their minds fixed on the promise. After the 7th circuit was complete, Joshua gave the command. He told the priests, "Blow the trumpets." And then he turned to the people and shouted the words they had been waiting to hear: "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." At that moment, a massive, collective shout erupted from the entire nation of Israel. It wasn't just a random noise, it was a shout of faith, a triumphant roar that declared the victory was already won. And as the sound of the trumpets and the great shout echoed across the valley, the impossible happened. Joshua chapter 6 verse 20 says, "So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown." As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat. Not just a breach, not a crack, not a single section. The entire massive structure collapsed in on itself, turning the impenetrable fortress into a flat, accessible plain. The walls, the very symbol of Jericho's power and pride, were reduced to rubble in an instant. The path was clear. The Israelite army then simply walked straight into the city, just as God had promised. Victory was achieved not through human effort, but through divine intervention. This story is so much more than a historical account of a military campaign. It's a powerful lesson about the nature of faith and the way God works. The victory at Jericho teaches us several key principles. First, God's plans often defy human logic. Marching silently and shouting on command makes no sense from a military standpoint, but it was God's chosen method. It reminds us that our obedience to God is not contingent on our understanding. We are called to trust His wisdom, even when it looks foolish to the world. Second, the battle belongs to the Lord. The Israelites didn't knock down those walls. Their job was to show up, to obey, and to have faith. God did the heavy lifting. This is a crucial reminder for us when we face our own walls or challenges in our finances, our health, our relationships, or our careers. We can exhaust ourselves trying to break them down with our own strength, or we can follow God's lead and trust Him to fight the battle for us. Third, there is power in unified faith and obedience. The people acted as one. They marched in silence together, and they shouted together. This unity in following God's command was a critical part of the process. And finally, the story shows that faith requires action. It wasn't enough for them to just believe God would give them the city. They had to get up and march for 7 days. Faith isn't passive, it's an active trust that leads to obedience, even when the steps don't make sense. So what are the walls of Jericho in your life right now? What seems impossible, impenetrable, and overwhelming? Maybe it's a deeply ingrained habit, a broken relationship, a financial crisis, or a dream that seems impossibly far away. The story of Jericho invites you to reconsider your strategy. Instead of trying to fight it in your own strength, what would it look like to march in obedience to God? Perhaps that means consistent prayer, reading His Word, taking small, faithful steps He's asking you to take, and trusting Him with the outcome. Your shout might be an act of praise and thanksgiving before you even see the breakthrough, declaring faith in a victory that God has already secured. The fall of Jericho is a timeless promise that with God, no wall is too high, no obstacle is too great, and victory can be won in the most unexpected ways. Thank you so much for watching. If this story encouraged you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that explores these powerful truths. Share this video with someone who might be facing their own Jericho walls. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, be strong and courageous.